Hello and welcome to Katrina's Creations Friday edition. As you can hear, I don't have my voice back yet. So today's video is going to be a little bit of a rerun to try to salvage what's left of my voice because I have to sing at a funeral tomorrow and I don't think I'm going to be singing. I think it's going to be an instrumental. In fact, I guarantee it's going to be an instrumental. There's no way it's coming back this soon. So what I thought I would do is put clips from a video that I did 6 years ago. Actually, it's hard to believe it was that long ago, but it is on different yarn weights and what those yarn weights work up to look like, and just information about each yarn weight and what they are typically used for. So I hope you find it enjoyable and helpful. You'll see what I look like with long frizzy white hair. Yeah, so, and a little bit more weight on me at that point. So I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope next Friday I'm back with like the normal voice. So with that, I will insert a stroll down memory lane video tutorial sort of thing. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Midweek tutorial on yarn weight. This was requested by several people, so let's get started. What I'm going to teach you is by no means definitive. There's always exceptions to the rules. And some yarn weights just kind of fall in between different categories. So let's start with how it all kind of breaks down. There are roughly 6 different sizes of yarns. And we're going to go through from the smallest or thinnest weight to the largest. Now, when it refers to weight, it's not talking about how heavy the yarn is. It's talking about the thickness of the yarn. So let's get started with the thinnest, which is the lace weight. Now, when you buy yarn, sometimes it will say what weight it is, sometimes it doesn't. So that's kind of why I'm doing this, so you can kind of gauge for yourself. And I actually used Wikipedia yarn weight to find all the information, and there is a chart there. So if you want to actually look at the chart that I'm going to be talking about, I got it from Wikipedia yarn weights. So sometimes it's made easy for you and they tell you what weight the yarn is, or they have this little skein, as you can see right here, and it has a number. It looks like a little skein of yarn. It has a number on it. That number tells you the weight of the yarn. The first one, the thinnest, is the lace weight. And if there's a skein of yarn with a little number, it's going to have a 0. If you live in the UK or you live in Australia or Germany, it's going to say it's a 1 ply. Even though it might have more than 1 ply to it, like this has, I think, 2 plies. It might have more than 1 ply, but that's how it's referred to in those countries. So lace weight is very, very thin. As you can see right here, it's extremely thin. The things that you would make out of lace weight are lace. They're going to be lacier items. You're not going to use something this thin to knit stockinette or garter stitch with. It's going to strictly be for lace. So your doilies, table runners, things that are lacy are going to be made out of that. And I have this that was made out of a lace weight so that you can see what it looks like when it's knitted up. Now, all of the examples that I'm going to show you are knitted because I really haven't done enough crochet to be able to show you what a crocheted one would look like. But this would be like your doilies. So if you crochet doilies, you're using lace weight. So that would be number 1. The other interesting thing, if it doesn't have a weight on it, you can sometimes tell by the amount of yards per 100 grams. So a lace weight roughly has between 600 and 800 meters, which is 656 to 875 yards. So it's going to have the most yarn per 100 grams. And if you were to figure out the wraps per inch, you'll see WPI a lot of times written on the yarn ball band. What that is referring to is if you take your size needle or hook and you were to wrap it around and around and around, side by side for 1 inch, the number of wraps you get would tell you how far the yarn is going to go. So in the case of lace weight, you're going to get 30 to 40 wraps per inch. And the recommended needle size for lace weight is usually a 1.5 to 2.5 millimeter needle, which is going to be right around your 0 as far as the US size. It's going to be a 0 to a 1. And if you're crocheting, your hook size is going to be a 1.5 to a 2.5 millimeter hook, or in US size would be an A or B size hook. So these are the tiny little teeny hooks. That's what you're going to use with this. So that's the first weight. And the second sizes, so numbers 1 and 2 on that little skein, can be the most confusing because they can be, a lot of it can be kind of interchangeable. In fact, even parts of the number 3 size yarn can be interchangeable, and I'll explain that in just a minute. The number 1 size skein, in the US, it is called fingering, light fingering, sock weight, or baby yarn. So in the UK, Australia, and Germany, it is referred to as 3-ply. All right, so let me show you some of it. It is basically what you make socks out of. It is that size, or if you were making some light baby things, this is what it looks like. Now, when you compare it to the lace weight, you can see quite a difference in size. It's almost twice as thick. So sometimes if you hold two lace yarns together, you would get the lighter weight here. Now, this is the fingering, the sock or baby yarn. It's light fingering. It's going to run 500 to 600 meters per 100 grams, which is 547 to 656 yards. And if you get your wraps per inch, it's going to be 20 to 30 wraps per inch. It's going to use a size 2 to 3 millimeter needle, which in US size is 0 to 2. And again, this is your sock sizes. And in your crochet hook, it is going to be a 2.25 to a 3.5 millimeter, which is also a 2 to a 4, or a B to an E in your hook size. So this is where it gets a little confusing, because there's also, like I said, this is light fingering. There is also fingering weight. Now, fingering weight and light fingering weight are what you see a lot of times used in your shawls. A good majority of your shawls are used for that. So let me show you the difference. This is fingering weight right here. And here is light fingering weight. There is very, very little difference. You can see very, very little difference. They're pretty much interchangeable. If I held them and knitted them together, there would be no real difference. So a lot of times the light fingering and fingering weight are interchangeable. Sock yarn is also interchangeable pretty much with fingering weight, as well as baby yarn. Fingering weight can also be called 4-ply. It tends to run 350 to 450 meters per 100 grams, which is 383 yards to 492 yards per 100 gram. The wraps per inch are 14 to 24. So fingering is slightly bigger than light fingering, but a lot depends on the company that's put it together, because I tend to use them interchangeably. And now let me show you something I've knitted up with fingering weight, and I believe this was knit with a 5. This is the Bendy Arrow by Charlotte Bory. I'm not going to hold the whole thing up, but I'm going to try to get this close so you can see kind of the density here. This is what the yarn overs open up to. And like I said, this was knit on a 4 or 5 millimeter, if I remember rightly. So, yeah, like I said, the rules are not hard and fast. Now let me show you the next weight up, which would be a yarn weight number 2, which is also called a 4-ply, just like the fingering. Like I said, the fingering kind of falls between light fingering and sport. This is a sport weight yarn right here. This is LRA Classic Sport. And here's something that I have knitted up with the sport weight yarn. This is a shawl that I designed called the Keeping You in Stitches shawl. But I want you to see, this was knit on a 5. And you can see it's a little open because I wanted this to be a lacy pattern. The sport weight yarn, which also baby yarn, can fall under the sport weight as well. It tends to be 250 to 300 meters per 100 grams, which is 273 to 383 yards. And the wraps per inch with that are 12 to 18 wraps per inch. The recommended needle size is a 3 to 4 millimeter, which is a 2 to 6 US. Like I said, most of the time it's knitted with about a 5. The hook size is going to be a 3.5 to 4.5 millimeter, which is the equivalent of a 4 to a 7, or an E to a GH size of hook. Now we move into another one that gets a little confusing because a lot of us talk about DK weight yarn, and I've had people say, I can't get DK weight where I live. There's other names for DK. That's part of the confusion. DK is the number 3 on this little skein symbol. It can also be referred to as an 8-ply or light worsted. What it basically is, again, it kind of falls in between the sport and the worsted weight. It's an in-between weight. And here is some that I have. This is the LRA Cozy Soft. And here you can see it. Let me hold the other yarn up so you can see the comparison between it and the sport weight. And again, it's not a whole lot of difference. So you're sizing between your 1, 2, and 3, which is between your light fingering up to your DK or light worsted, can be very loose. Yeah, can be very loose because a lot of it, if I looked at both of these yarns, I would say they were both the same weight, but according to the labels, they're not. So a lot of it is just using your own judgment, reading the labels, and doing some little test knitting or crocheting swatches to see what you think it's going to fall as, because it also depends on your tension. So let me show you what the DK again looks like. Here it is, and it's also referred to, like I said, as light worsted. On average, there are 200 to 250 meters per skein of 100 grams, which is 219 to 273 yards. Wraps per minute is 11 to 15. And your needle size is a 4 to a 4.5 millimeter, or a 6 to a 7. And in a hook size, it's going to be a 4.5 to a 5.5, which is a 7 to a 9, or G to an I, somewhere in that ballpark. Let me show you something that's been knitted up. This is another pattern that I designed called Katrina's Kerchief Cowl. And this is knit
with a DK weight. It is fairly dense. There are some holes here for yarn. You can't even really see them a whole lot, but there are some little holes, little dots right in here. And here's some open work. So you can kind of see what it looks like with the yarn overs. And again, it's considered a light worsted. So when you hear people refer to it as a DK, it's a little bit heavier than sport, but not as heavy as worsted. So now we move on to the worsted, which is the workhorse for crocheters. I think a good majority of crocheters use worsted weight as opposed to knitters. Knitters use it, but not as much. At least in my own experience, most knitters are knitting with some of the lighter weights, like the light fingering, sport weight, any of those, or the DKs. So this is worsted. This is what you would knit or crochet a lot of times Afghans out of. This is, like I said, this is the workhorse size. You're going to make your granny squares out of this. You're going to make Afghans out of this, things like that, ponchos, stuff like that. A lot of it is knit out of the worsted weight yarn. So I do have a sample to show you, but I have to pull it off my bed. This is a blanket that I knitted out of different patterns. Every block was a different pattern, and this is knitted with worsted weight yarn. Like I said, this is, I think everybody pretty much knows what worsted weight yarn is. It can also be called, your worsted weight can also be referred to as Afghan yarn. It can also sometimes be referred to as Aran yarn, although a lot of times Aran yarn is slightly thicker than, it's not chunky, but it's slightly thicker or heavier than a typical worsted weight. You don't run into it as often, but if it's a little heavier than worsted, chances are it's an Aran weight. And that is a number 4 on the yarn skein symbol. It is also referred to as a 10 to 12 ply yarn. It has usually 120 to 200 meters per 100 grams, which is 131 to 219 yards. The wraps per inch are 9 to 12. The needle size is a 4.5 to 5.5 millimeter needle, which is a 7 to 9. On average, you're going to use about an 8. And if you're crocheting, you're going to use a 5.5 to 6.5 millimeter hook, which is a 9 to 10.5, which would be an I to a K. And when I have crocheted with this, I believe I used an I or a J, which is right in the right range. Now we move on to the yarn weight number 5, which is called the bulky. It's called chunky. It is 12 to 16 ply. And it's also sometimes referred to as rug yarn. This is the heavy, chunky yarn. And it is usually only 100 to 130 meters per 100 grams, which is 109 to 142 yards. The wraps per inch are only 6 to 8, and you can really see that if I were to wrap this around my finger. You can see that to get an inch, I've only got about 5. And they're saying 6 to 8, so yeah, I could maybe slide one more on there. So I'm going to get about 6 wraps to that inch. The needle size that you're going to use is anywhere from a 5.5 to 8 millimeter, which in US needle size is a 9 to an 11. And the hook size, if you're crocheting, is going to be a 6.5 to a 9 millimeter, which is a K to an N. It's a 10.5 to a 15. So there's a wide gap there. Now to show you something that's been knit with that, I have this cowl. This is called the Christina cowl. It's one of the Cozy Up designs from Cozy Up with the Stitchin' Sisters. This is one of the cowls that they designed, and I do believe I knit this with a size 11. So you can see how chunky it is. This is actually very soft too because it's got some alpaca in it. But you can see the stitch definition. It is very thick and chunky, and this knits up very, very fast. Now the final yarn that we're going to talk about is the super bulky or chunky or rovings. I don't have any to show you, but it's going to be like this thick. It looks like you're knitting ropes basically, and that's going to have a number 6. And there's actually even some that are even thicker than that. I have knit some a while back. I knit a blanket, and the yarn was literally this thick around. It looked like rovings that I normally would spin with. So this is referring to any of that. It kind of all falls into the super bulkies. It is going to be in a 100-ounce skein. You're going to get less than 100 meters or less than 109 yards. The wraps per inch are going to be 5 to 6 tops, depending on if as the yarn gets thicker, the less wraps per inch you're going to get. And the needle size is going to be greater than an 8 millimeter. So it could be anything up to whatever. I think the size I used were 15s. No, they were bigger than that. My mother has some that's 15s. They are, yeah, I think the size I used was like a 50. The knitting needles I used were literally this big around when I knit it. And a crochet hook is going to be anything above a size 9 millimeter. So it's going to be anything from a 15 up as far as the US size. So yes, your huge oversized crochet hooks, that's going to work for the super chunkies or super bulkies or super chunkies. So let me try to hold up a little bit of each of the weights that I've discussed so you can see the comparison between them. Here we go. For comparison, this is your lace weight here. This is considered sock weight. This is considered light fingering, although they are almost interchangeable. You can see them right beside each other. They're very, very similar. So this is the sport weight, which is very similar. It's a little bit thicker, but not a whole lot different from these two. However, when you put a DK, which is a light worsted, and compare it to the fingering weight or even the sport weight. So here, this is the sport weight. This is your DK. Over here, you can see the difference between your light fingering and fingering weights and sock weights and the DK. So here we have worsted weight, and this is the DK. You can see that they're very, very close. This is slightly smaller around, or thinner around than this, but again, not by much. And then here you can see the chunky, which is, it stands out all by itself. So these, the light worsted and worsted are similar in size and in weight. And your sport, your light fingering, your fingering, and baby are all similar in weight and size. And then your lace weight again stands by itself. So hopefully that's helped out a little bit and answered some questions. And otherwise, I will see you again on Saturday. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Bye.